Hey, what's going on? My name's Kyle. I have a question for you today. Is any punishment worth death? My name's Kyle. I'm a student at USF, and today, recently I've been researching the death penalty and what that means and whether it's really worth it or not in today's society. Like you, I'm sure you've heard of it, the death penalty, and thought about why it would be necessary. I remember hearing about the death penalty with certain criminals in the past, like certain famous murderers or something that's going on where someone would get killed, or people who have been killed in the past. That's not when they find out that they got killed for no reason. So today we're just gonna be going over that. And to me, in my personal opinion, and what I'm going to be trying to persuade you to believe today is that I think death penalties are sometimes a necessary punishment due to the severity of the crime. In my speech, I'll be going over the pros and cons of the death penalty and introducing thoughts that I might have had, or maybe you've never really thought about or thought through, and offering why it might be necessary in the death penalty sense. I'll be using multiple sources across the internet to try and prove and explain to you why it might be necessary. For example, one of the most important reasons why death penalty might be needed is because it can prevent future criminals from being on the street. For example, I think that if someone's a reoffender 2 or 3 times, that they're gonna likely to keep doing it no matter how many times you put them in jail. So you can either keep them in jail forever, or you can give them the death penalty. I know it's a little harsh to hear, but it's the truth. And using the source, pros and cons of the death penalty, it talks about how the death penalty can be one of the biggest deterrents for highest levels of crime. For example, if the death penalty rate is high, a lot less people are going to do violent crimes because people are scared of dying. Another sub-point to that would be in the White House Journal. It claims that purpose. Capital punishment is an essential tool for deterring and punishing those who would commit the most heinous crimes and acts of lethal violence against American citizens. As a deterrent. So it's not necessarily, it is a tough punishment, and that's true. It's understandable why some other people might not believe that, but at the same time, it's a deterrent. It's not necessarily mean to just kill everybody that is in jail or anything like that. It's used to prevent people from doing the same thing over and over and over again. And honestly, this is an explanation from the White House. This isn't coming from me. This isn't coming from some random person on the internet. This is coming from the White House. The government. It's issued out. Like, this is their train of thought. It's the same thing. It's just this is a important piece of the puzzle is to understand why we have the death penalty in place. And honestly, it's a government claim. Like, I understand how some people might have different outlook than the government, but you have to understand this is not. I'm trying to persuade you, but with the facts. It's the government. They're not going to just truly lie to us. They sometimes. Even though the death, but here's another thing though. Even though the death penalty might make sense, it's important to have basically both sides of it. So some people have to understand why death penalty is good, and some people think the death penalty is bad. Opposers of the death penalty may claim it as inhumane and too severe punishment. And looking at the claim from the Equal Justice Initiative, the death penalty also has had mistakes and can attack people who are vulnerable. People who have not even committed the crime, they're falsely accused, or people who find out later in the future that there were mistakes. I'm sure we've all heard of the 14-year-old boy who was falsely mistaken and he was killed for the wrong reason. In a case like that, I can understand why some people might be going against it, but at the same time, another subpoint that would be the Advocation for Human Rights discusses many countries view capital punishment as inherently arbitrary and discriminatory. And to that, I can see how it can be discrimination. Maybe there's a racial bias in it, or something that's going to cause people to have a higher rate of getting the death penalty than others. But at the same time, what's more, when truly convicted, with the evidence right there, what's more inhumane? Having murderers on the street or people in jail? People getting back on the street. People getting back on the street or keeping murderers off the street. That's how I'm seeing it. But at the end of the day, there's always two sides to every coin, and I can see both sides of the argument. I truly can. But we have to look at it from a factual, non-feeling-based perspective in order for the betterment of our society. In order to look at this from a complete standpoint, I think we should look at it from the law standpoint. From a lawyer's point of view, people who have done this their entire lives and this is what they do. The National District Attorneys Association made the argument, perhaps the most straightforward argument for the death penalty is that it saves innocent lives by preventing convicted murderers from killing again. So the National District Attorneys Association, so the DA, they are in charge of kind of pursuing criminals or maybe denying. And they're saying that the most important reason for this is to deter future criminals from doing the same thing. It's kind of like if your parents if you knew you had a bad punishment coming for certain types of trouble, you would do less of it, right? your parents wanted, if your parents had like, you're gonna go sit time out for 2 hours or face corner, you're less likely to go do it. You know what I'm saying? But if your parents were like, okay, if you do something wrong, we're going to, give you a slap on the wrist, you're more likely to do it than if you have a more enhanced punishment that you rarely will get because you'll do it less often. And I think that's looking at it from a real perspective, kind of just general point of view, and not just more so much as anything else. But I believe that this evidence supports my claim for the death penalty, and that I hope it will influence you to look at it from a whole perspective. And I have a question, how would you feel if your mother got hurt by a criminal who was a reoffender? He's been doing this for a while, or she's been doing this for a while, and she's been backing off and on the street, for violent crimes, and then suddenly your mom's dead. How would you feel? You know what I'm saying? I'm trying to relate to the person. Like, I know how I would feel. I'd be extremely angry about it. Because why is he even out there now? Or why is she even out there? But all in all, I think the death penalty is necessary in some circumstances. I think that it's sometimes a little hard, but sometimes it's necessary, and I think it helps keep murderers and violent criminals off the streets. I think death penalty is sometimes a necessary punishment due to the severity of the crimes. And I think our call to action as a society is to make sure everyone is safe and feels that way. As a society, I think we need to act based on ideas for the betterment of our society. And if you look at the evidence, I know that you think we should too. My name is Kyle O'Hare, and at the end of the day, I know everyone thinks differently, which is good. But I think we should all come together about our future, and knowing that everyone has different opinions and should view the death penalty differently, it's sometimes necessary for our community to be safer. Some may view it as inhumane, but I have a question: what's more inhumane to you, the murderer or the one who avenges the murderer? For my sources today, I used the White House restoring the death penalty and protecting public safety, the Advocation for Human Rights, in defense of the death penalty, arguments for and against the death penalty, and the Equal Justice Initiative. I hope you have a good day, and thank you.